Montana Territory, August 1878. The sun had barely cleared the peaks when the town of Red Rock Falls gathered in the dusty street like buzzards to a carcass. Odette Barlow's hands were still bloodied when Sheriff Alder dragged her through the saloon doors and shoved her into the sunlight. Her split lip was swelling, and her jaw ached from where Nathaniel Carr had struck her first. But he was the one lying cold on the floor now, his own pistol beside his lifeless hand. "She murdered him," hissed Miss Hargreaves, clutching her lace collar like it might shield her from the truth. "In front of half the town." "He cornered her," someone muttered, but the voice got swallowed in the crowd's hum. "I defended myself," Odette said, her voice low but steady. The sheriff spat in the dirt at her feet. "You're lucky I ain't hanging you. Pack your things, you're banished. If you're still in town by sundown, I'll let his brothers come for you." Odette didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded once, slow, and walked out with her head held high, past the folks who'd eaten her stew and borrowed her books and smiled at her in church. None of them looked her in the eye. By nightfall, she was gone. The Bitterroot Mountains were rough country, and Odette rode alone for 4 days with only a small mare, a bedroll, and 2 tins of beans. The bruises on her ribs throbbed with every breath, but she pressed on, deeper into the wilderness, not knowing where she was going, only that she could not go back. On the 5th day, her horse limped to a stop near a dry creek. The animal's leg was swollen, useless. Odette slid off and crumpled to her knees, her body aching, her mouth dry. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. "Go on," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the mare's neck. "You tried." The horse only stood there, eyes dull. She stayed with it until dusk, then gathered her things and started walking. Her boots were worn through by the time a flicker of firelight caught her eye through the trees. She stepped closer, cautious, her hand on her knife. A cowboy sat by the flames, cooking something over the fire. His hat was low over his brow and his coat was dusted from the trail. He looked up slow, like he had heard her coming all along. "You look near dead," he said, voice deep and calm. Odette didn't answer. She just stared. He stood and stepped into the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle strapped across his back and a scar along his jaw. His eyes were green, sharp, and quiet. "I'm Jesse Fairburn," he said, not reaching for his weapon. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. He handed her a tin plate without asking questions. She sat across from him, legs trembling as she ate. After a while, he said, "You running from something?" She looked at him then. "I killed a man who tried to force himself on me. Self-defense. But the town said it was murder." Jesse nodded slow, like he understood too well. "Most folks don't like a woman who fights back." "I have nowhere to go," she said. "You do now," Jesse said, and his voice was firm. "There's land out here, a ranch I run. It's quiet. No one comes unless I say they can. You can stay there." Odette narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Jesse leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because you did not do anything wrong, and because you're strong and you're mine." She blinked. "What? You heard me." His voice didn't waver. "You belong with someone who sees that fire in you and does not want to put it out." Odette's chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, still rough from travel. "You do not even know me." "Then let me," he said, simple as that. Jesse's ranch sat at the edge of a wide valley, tucked against the trees. It was not much, a few fenced acres, a small cabin, a barn, and a creek that ran clean and cold. He had a few cattle, a pair of working horses, and a dog named Bramble who took to Odette right away. She stayed. At first, she slept in the barn while Jesse gave her space. He let her heal, let her work. She helped with the animals, fixed the shutters, mended the fence. She never asked for more than she needed, and he never pushed, but at night they sat by the fire, quiet. Sometimes he read aloud from a book she found in his trunk. Sometimes she told him about her mother's garden, long gone now. Sometimes they just listened to the wind. One morning, Jesse came back from the trail with a mare following behind him, her own, the one she had left behind. "Found her limping near Dead Man's Ridge. Figured she was yours." Odette ran to the animal, tears in her eyes. "You went looking for her." "I knew you would not leave her," Jesse said, watching her gently stroke the horse's muzzle. That night, she made stew from scratch and brought it to the cabin. She knocked once before stepping inside. Jesse was at the table, shirt sleeves rolled up, hands calloused and strong. "You cook better than I ever will," he admitted, taking a bite. Do not forget it, she said, her lips tugging into the first smile she had shown in weeks. He looked up at her then, eyes soft. You smile like the sun coming through after a storm, her cheeks flushed. You always talk like that, only when I mean it. She stepped closer. What else do you mean? He stood, close now. That I have not stopped thinking about you since the night you walked into my firelight. Odette's breath caught. She reached up, fingers brushing his jaw. I should be afraid to trust anyone after what happened. I know, Jesse said, resting his hand lightly against her waist. So let me earn it, day by day. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned in slowly, and when their lips met, it was quiet, sure, and full of something that went deep. She whispered, You really think I am yours? Jesse's voice was rough with feeling. I know it. Odette smiled again, and this time it stayed. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil through the valley as September settled in clear and sharp. Morning frost silvered the grass, and the cattle's breath hung in the air like smoke. Odette pulled the cabin door shut behind her, shawl tight across her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch where Jesse was saddling his gelding. You're heading out early, she said, watching the way his hands moved, deliberate, practiced, never hurried. There's a downed fence near the west pasture. Elk came through last night. I'll be back before supper. She nodded, then hesitated. If you'll leave the rifle, I'll check the line along the creek while you're gone. Jesse glanced up, brow raised. You sure? I know the land well enough now, and the dog listens to me. She looked toward the hills. It's easier to breathe when I'm out there. Jesse studied her for a beat, then unbuckled the rifle and handed it over. Watch the slope near the bluff. It's crumbly after last week's rain. She took the weapon without comment, but her fingers brushed his as she did. Neither moved away too quickly. By midday, she and Bramble had worked their way through the lower edge of the property. The dog nosed along ahead, and Odette followed the creek's bend, eyes scanning for breaks in the wire or fresh tracks. Her boots sank into the damp moss where the shade lingered, and the air was still except for the quiet trickle of water. Near a stand of cedar, she found the fence sagging where a branch had fallen. She knelt, cut it free, and began retying the wire. Her hands worked steady, but her thoughts drifted. She hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Jesse for near a month now. The quiet had become something she craved, not feared. But sometimes it still caught her off guard how peace could feel like a stranger. A sharp crack echoed from the trees. She rose fast, rifle up, but Bramble didn't bark. Instead, the dog trotted toward the noise, tail wagging low. A figure stepped out from the trees, a woman, older, wrapped in a wool shawl and carrying a woven basket. Her face was weather-lined, her gray braid tucked beneath a scarf. You're on Fairburn land, Odette said, rifle still in hand, though lowered now. I know whose land it is. The woman's voice was even. I bring herbs. Jesse trades meat for them. Odette's grip eased. You're from the Flathead village near the ridge. The woman nodded once. My name is Mina. You're the one he brought back from the woods. Odette didn't answer right away. She straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt. I'm helping with fence work. He's at the western edge. He said you'd stay a little while. Mina tilted her head. But you're planting onion bulbs behind the barn. That's not the work of someone passing through. Odette's lips twitched, caught between a frown and a smile. I guess I stopped thinking about leaving. Mina stepped closer, pulling a small bundle from her basket and offering it. For the bruises that stay too deep to see, steep it in hot water. Drink it at night. Odette took it, fingers closing around the cloth. Thank you, Mina's gaze lingered. He lost someone too, long time back. Wife died birthing a child that didn't make it. He doesn't speak of it. Odette didn't move. He's never mentioned her. He wouldn't. Mina turned to go, but he wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't mean to try again. When Jesse returned that evening, he found her in the garden with her sleeves rolled and fingernails caked in soil. He stepped from his horse and leaned against the fence. You're planting late. Bulbs go in before the frost if you want them come spring. He nodded, then glanced down at his boots. Mina left some roots in the shed, said she saw you. She said more than that, Odette replied. He looked up, wary. What did she say? That you've known loss. He didn't speak for a long moment, then came to the gate and opened it. I buried them on the hill behind the barn. There's a stone. I don't visit much. Odette stood, dusting off her hands. You don't have to say more. I want to. His voice was rough. I want you to know that I've been broken too. That I've known what it is to wake up and not know who I am without the weight of someone else's grief pressing down on my chest. She stepped forward slowly until the space between them was gone. I don't want to be a shadow in this place. You aren't. He met her gaze steady. You are the first thing that's felt alive in years. She rested her hand over his heart. Then let's both try again. His hand covered hers, warm and solid, and when the sun dipped low and the chill came on, they went inside together. This time, neither one sat alone. By mid-October, the first snow dusted the ridge above the cabin, clinging to the high branches and sinking into the pines in fine silence. The mornings came cold enough that Jesse had to break ice from the water troughs with the back of his axe, and Odette rose before light to build the fire and keep it fed. One morning, she stood by the hearth with a bowl of cornmeal mush warming in her hands. Jesse leaned against the counter, watching her with a quietness that had grown familiar between them, not heavy, just steady, like a river moving beneath ice. You've been walking the fence line past the west pasture more these days, he said, voice low. I saw smoke on the ridge, she replied, not turning. 3 days in a row, not yours, he straightened. You think someone's watching the land. I think someone's near enough to know we're here. Jesse nodded once, then crossed the room and pulled down the long-barreled rifle from the wall. I'll ride up after breakfast. I'm going with you, she said, setting the bowl aside. You've been running long enough, he said gently. You don't need to chase ghosts in the trees. Odette met his gaze. I'm not afraid of ghosts. But I won't be caught unaware again, Jesse, not for anyone's comfort. He studied her face, then gave a single nod. We'll ride at first light. Bring the mare. They left the horses tethered below the ridge and climbed the last slope on foot, boots crunching through frost-hardened needles. Jesse moved ahead, rifle ready, while Odette followed, her breath steady, her knife sheathed at her side. At the crest, they found the remains of a fire burned low, recent, the ash still holding warmth. Beside it, a strip of fabric caught on a branch, stiff with blood. Odette crouched beside it. Cut himself, she murmured. Didn't stay long. Jesse scanned the tree line. Could be a trapper. Could be someone who doesn't want to be seen. They waited in the silence for a long minute, only the wind moving around them. Then Jesse turned back. We'll circle east, see if we pick up a trail. They didn't find tracks that day, but Jesse tied a strip of red cloth to the nearest branch and marked the location in his head. When they rode back, Odette stayed quiet until the cabin came into view, the chimney smoke curling into a sky gone pale with evening. Inside, she took off her coat and hung it by the door. Jesse poured water into the kettle and set it over the fire. You think someone's following me? She asked, voice low. I think Carr's family might want what they think is justice, he answered, but this land's far and winter's coming. If they're out there, they're either desperate or dumb. Odette sat at the table, her fingers threading through one another. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You didn't, he said. You brought yourself, that's all I ever asked for. She looked up. You're not a man who says more than he means, are you? He sat across from her. I've had enough years to know what I stand by. You're not a guest anymore, Odette. This is your home, same as it is mine. She didn't answer right away. Then she reached across the table and laid her hand over his, her touch light but certain. I want to plant sugar beets come spring, she said. And maybe there's room for a row of cabbage. He turned his hand to hold hers. We'll need to clear more ground. They sat like that until the kettle began to whistle. Neither moved until the steam filled the air between them. Later that week, Odette took a trip down to the creek alone, basket on her arm, to gather the last of the wild rose hips before the snow came too deep. On her way back, she heard a soft whinny from the woods below the bluff. She stepped quietly toward the sound, hand on the hilt at her belt. Through the bare branches, she saw a bay gelding tied loosely to a sapling, saddlebags still strapped, no rider in sight. She backed away, careful not to snap a twig underfoot, and returned to the cabin without raising alarm. That night, she told Jesse what she'd seen. He didn't speak for a long moment, then stood and took his coat down from the peg. I'll ride out before dawn. I'll be ready before you saddle the horse, she said, already pulling on her boots. He paused. This isn't just about you anymore, you know that? I do, she said. That's why I'm not letting you go alone. They left before first light, riding in close silence, their breath clouding in the cold. What they found was not what either expected. The man they came upon was slumped against a boulder, one leg twisted beneath him, a rifle lying untouched at his side. His face was pale, lips cracked, and his coat soaked through. Jesse knelt beside him. "Been out here too long. Hypothermic." Odette touched the man's brow, still breathing. They built a litter from pine branches and dragged him to the horses. The ride back was slow but steady, and by the time they reached the cabin, the clouds above had thickened with snow. They laid the man before the fire, stripped his wet clothes, and wrapped him in wool. Odette boiled water while Jesse checked his pulse again. "He's young," she said, watching the man's chest rise and fall. "Barely more than a boy." "He's not one of Carr's kin," Jesse said. "I'd recognize the face." Odette met his eyes. "Then who's he running from?" Jesse didn't answer, but as the snow began to fall in earnest, he reached for a fresh log and added it to the fire. The flames caught fast and burned higher, chasing the cold from the corners of the room. The boy's fever broke 2 days later, sweat soaking through the wool blanket Odette had tucked around him. She'd been the one to sit with him through the worst of it, wiping his brow with cool cloths and coaxing sips of water between his chapped lips. Jesse had stayed near, but gave her the room to tend him like she needed to, like she understood something about lingering on the edge of a life not meant to end just yet. On the third morning, the boy stirred. His eyes opened slow, unfocused, then settled on the timber rafters above. "Where am I?" His voice rasped like dry bark. "You're safe," Odette said, setting aside the basin. "You rode too far in bad weather. We brought you in from the North Ridge." He turned his head, wincing. "The horse, still tethered outside," Jesse replied from the doorway, arms crossed. "You're lucky she didn't bolt." The boy shifted beneath the blanket, but his limbs were stiff. "Didn't mean to trespass, just needed somewhere quiet." "You're not the first," Jesse said, voice even, "but quiet don't come cheap out here." "You running from the law?" "No," the boy said, then hesitated. "Not exactly." Odette poured him a cup of broth and passed it to him. "Start with your name." "Illy Morse. I was farm help down in the Gallatin Valley. My brother signed on with a crew hauling freight. Left me behind with a man who drank more than he worked. I took a horse and left after he broke my arm last month." Odette looked at Jesse, who gave a slow nod. Illy's wrist was still thick with bruising, the bone healed crooked beneath the skin. "You could have died out there," Jesse said. Illy sipped the broth, hand shaking. "Didn't figure I had much to lose." Odette pulled the blanket tighter across his chest. "You don't need to leave right away, but winter's coming fast and this land won't keep more mouths than it can feed." "I'll pull my weight," Illy said quickly. "I know how to mend tack, split wood, trim hooves, just need a chance." Jesse didn't answer right off, then he turned to Odette. "You think we can spare the feed?" "We've got enough oats for the mare," she said, "and I don't mind showing him how we run things here." "He's rough, but he's trying." Jesse gave a thoughtful nod. "Then he stays, long as he works." Illy closed his eyes in relief. "Thank you." "We're not doing you a kindness," Jesse said. "We're giving you work." "That's different." That night, after the boy had drifted into sleep again, Jesse stood beside the hearth, sharpening his knife with slow, patient strokes. Odette sat nearby, mending a tear in one of her oldest skirts. "He reminds me of someone," she said, not looking up. "Who?" "Me. That first night when I didn't know if I should trust you, when I didn't know if I'd ever be useful to anyone again." Jesse set the blade down and walked to where she sat. He knelt, taking her hand from the fabric. "You've done more than prove yourself, Odette. You've carved a place into every corner of this land." She met his gaze. "It's not just the land anymore." He stood and drew her up with him, her hand still in his. "Come with me." He led her outside into the cold, the moon casting a pale wash over the clearing. The air was still, the kind that pressed close, waiting. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about what we've started here, about what we've both lost and what we've built from it." Odette didn't speak, eyes on his face. "I want to ask something of you," Jesse continued. "Not out of debt or gratitude, but because I've come to need you like breath. Because every morning I wake and look for you. Because this cabin doesn't feel like home unless your hands are in it." Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just for the winter, not just until you feel safe. I want this to be your land, your fire, your name beside mine on every single thing we build." Odette placed her hand over his heart. "I don't need time to think. I already chose you." Jesse's arms closed around her, not gentle but sure. She leaned into him, the warmth of his body anchoring her like nothing ever had. Behind them, the cabin stood solid against the rising wind. Inside it, a fire waited. A boy healed slowly, and a future, quiet and hard-earned, began to take root. By early November, the snow had deepened around the edges of the trees, and the paths to the barn packed hard beneath boots and hooves. The days shortened, and with them came stillness, the kind that settled into the walls and made every sound feel louder. But the cabin held warmth, and inside it, a rhythm had taken shape. Illy took to his work with a kind of desperate gratitude, never asking for more than was given. He had a quiet way about him, one that didn't ask questions unless he needed an answer. He listened when spoken to, and each day he carried more weight, hauling water, brushing the horses, tending the firewood stack until it stood taller than he did. One evening, while Jesse and Odette shelled dried beans at the table, Illy stepped in from the cold, his cheeks raw from wind. "I finished with the stalls," he said, voice muffled behind his scarf. "But I found something back of the barn, looked like it had been buried near the roots." Jesse set the bowl aside. "What kind of something?" Illy pulled off his gloves and brushed ice from his sleeves. "A tin box, locked. Weren't rusted through, though. Thought I ought to bring it in." Odette stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Show us." He returned moments later with a dented metal box clutched tight beneath one arm. Jesse took it, ran his thumb along the seam, and frowned. "No markings," he said. "Could have been here before I ever bought the place." Odette fetched a hammer from the shelf, and Jesse knocked the lock loose with 2 solid strikes. Inside, under a folded cloth, lay a stack of papers, yellowed, brittle along the edges, and beneath them, a silver locket on a frayed chain. Odette lifted the locket carefully, opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with dark eyes and a half smile, and opposite it, a tiny curl of hair. Jesse looked over her shoulder. "That's Emmeline," he said quietly. "She lived out here with her father before the war, homesteaders. The old place burned down, and most folks thought she died with him." Odette turned the papers over, one by one: land claims, a marriage license never filed, a letter written in looping script. "She meant to leave," Odette murmured. "She hid this where no one would think to look." Jesse leaned against the table, his expression unreadable. "She had no kin left. I reckon no one ever came looking." Odette closed the locket gently and set it beside the papers. "We should bury it proper, where the ground's soft enough to take it." That night, they laid Emmeline's box beneath the old cottonwood behind the pasture, where the earth hadn't frozen too deep. Jesse carved her name into a smooth stone and placed it at the base. "She was waiting for someone to find her," Odette said softly, her gloved hand tucked into Jesse's. "Even if she didn't know it." "She's not waiting anymore," Jesse whispered. The deep cold came in earnest soon after. Each morning began with the hiss of water poured onto the stove and the thud of boots across the porch. Odette kept the cabin, her hands steady with stitching and her voice low as she read aloud by lamplight. Jesse and Illy hauled hay and kept the roof clear, and when the wind howled off the ridge, they sat close by the fire and shared stories they hadn't known they'd kept. One evening, Odette stood before the hearth, brushing a curl from her cheek as Jesse came in from the barn. He shook off the snow and stepped close, the heat from his coat seeping into her skin as he wrapped his arms around her waist. "I've been thinking about spring," he said, his voice warm against her neck. "We could build a second room, give the kitchen more light. Maybe put in a root cellar." She leaned back into him, her fingers resting over his. "We'll need space if Lee decides to stay through next year." Jesse smiled into her shoulder. "That boy's got the makings of a hand if he keeps at it." She turned to face him fully. "And us," his gaze softened. "You and me, we've already built what matters." She reached up, her palm against the side of his face. "I want to marry you." Jesse's brow lifted slightly. "You sure? I've never been more certain of anything." He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't ask or promise, it simply was. When it broke, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll carve the bands myself," he whispered. "From the old juniper down by the creek." 2 weeks later, they stood beneath the bare-limbed sycamore beside the pasture, the snow packed flat beneath their boots. Mina came from the Flathead camp to say the words, her voice steady and low as she tied a strip of red cloth around both their joined wrists. "The land bears witness," she said simply, "and so do we." Lee stood beside them, his coat pressed and his boots shined. He held the rings Jesse had carved, sanded smooth and wrapped in twine. When Jesse slid the band onto Odette's finger, his hand didn't tremble. When she did the same, her eyes never left his. That night, they sat around the fire, the three of them, the dog curled at their feet, the scent of roasted venison in the air and the hearth glowing bright. The cabin felt full, not because of its size, but because of what had grown inside it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside, there was only warmth, only steady breath and firelight and the soft murmur of voices planning the rows of cabbage and beets, the new fence line, the timber they'd need to fell once the ground softened. And when Jesse reached for her hand beneath the table, Odette laced her fingers through his and held on. They did not speak of the lives they'd fled or the wounds they still carried. They didn't need to. What mattered was that they'd found each other, not by chance, but by choosing over and over through silence and storms and snowfall. By spring, the bulbs she'd planted had begun to push up through the thawing soil, pale green shoots reaching toward the sun. And on the porch, where a pair of chairs waited side by side, Jesse and Odette sat with their hands entwined, watching the land they now shared wake into bloom together. Always.